So welcome everybody to our Law Futures Center's Scholarly Roundtable series. And we're very delighted today to welcome and engage with an outstanding scholar in his discipline, Matthew Zagor, who is an associate professor at ANU College of Law and the director of ANU's Law, Reform, and Social Justice program. He's also an adjunct fellow at the ANU Center for European Studies and also a senior research associate at the Refugee Law Initiative at the University of London. Matthew has 20 years of experience as a human rights advocate, as a practitioner, and as a scholar. His research is characterized by a transdisciplinary approach and diversity, with recent publications covering comparative constitutional law, the legal recognition of refugee narrative identity, and the humanity turn of international law. So all very thought-provoking topics and areas. His current research applies theories of political theology to legal construction of the border and Australian judiciary's approach to human rights treaty obligations. His most recent research considers how liberal notions of autonomy, authenticity, and redemption inform legal and political construction of refugees. And his current project uses these concepts to explore state sovereignty and border control. So with that in mind, the scholarship he presents to us today considers the ways in which resettlement policies have participated in tropes familiar to classic antinomian political theology, focusing in particular on the lobbying that resulted in prioritizing Christians from Syria and Iraq in U.S. and Australian refugee programs. This paper identifies ways in which images and narratives of the martyred Middle Eastern Christians have been leveraged for political and redemptive purposes, and critiques the use of vulnerability as a touchstone principle for the allocation of scarce resettlement places in the Australian model. So this promises to be a very thought-provoking, engaging, conceptual look at these issues. So welcome. Thank you very much for spending time with us.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Every time I hear my CV read, I realise I have to update it. One of those things.
Now it's pretty current and interesting.
Yeah, it's little bits and pieces. So I'd like to thank both of you for inviting me to come and speak. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on. I'd also like to acknowledge John, my former corridor colleague at ANU Law, who is in part responsible for my career at ANU as an academic, because he gave me my first teaching gig back in 2002 or 3. So I guess that's something I should be thanking you for. Move careers into academia. Thanks, John. That's right. I last came to Griffith 4 years ago. It's actually the anniversary of Malcolm Turnbull's toppling Tony Abbott. I remember that day itself. I was here at Griffith, and I did a bit of paper that explored things, some of which were just mentioned, relating to autonomy and authenticity in refugee narratives. It was rather abstract. It was quite Kantian, had a critical view. I was told that was very appropriate for Griffith. And it also relied heavily on the Kamatura's Savage Victim Saviour framework of analysis that's been widely adopted to critique humanitarianism and human rights law. I gave it a bit of a twist by adding the discourse of generosity and the notion of the genuine refugee into the mix. And for those of you who heard me on that occasion and might have any memory of that particular paper, you're going to know there's certain synergies with today's talk. Today's talk, initially at least, is a little bit more down to earth. It deals with a very distinct refugee program, the refugee resettlement policies in the US and Australia. but it inevitably returns to some of those themes, notably the notion of the saviour and the redemptive motifs which play out in both government and advocacy narratives around refugees. And in this respect, it sort of brings together a lot of things I've been looking at over the last 5-6 years under the broader rubric of a nascent critical theology of refugee law. I appreciate that using the term critical theology, I should probably be advised at Griffith when I use these sorts of terms. It invites all sorts of critique and confirmations from people who have read Smith and Rambin. I should point out I do have a degree in religious studies, but it was largely in Hindu philosophy, so I'm relatively new to this area. But what strikes me, and I suppose what largely motivated me to do the research for this paper, is that refugee law generally and refugee resettlement programs specifically has become really effective vehicles for those with a very specific theologically infused geopolitical worldview. And so that was my starting point. This brings me, as I suppose most conversations do nowadays, unfortunately, to President Donald Trump. Just in case you thought he wasn't going to get mentioned, and the Muslim travel ban. But bear with me, the connection will become apparent, hopefully, soon. In the hours after he signed the first executive order that introduced the so-called Muslim ban, and while European leaders were lining up to express their concern at its manifestly discriminatory intent and its impact, Australian politicians were lining up to congratulate the President on his, quote, strong immigration and border protection policies. That was former Foreign Minister Julie Bishop. And on, quote, catching up with Australia, in the words of the then Treasurer and former Minister for Immigration and soon-to-be Prime Minister, newly re-elected Scott Morrison. Obviously, the idea that the rest of the world might catch up and adopt Australia's punitive border protection policies has been a goal of successive Australian governments who are keen to see us shed the mantle of global leader in refugee cruelty, a mantle that, as foreign affairs officials in Canberra will tell you, confidentially, has impeded our normative influence on the global stage and in particular domestically coming in. So here was vindication at the very highest levels. But what exactly was the policy purportedly being aped by our American cousins? Well, this was to become clear in August of 2017 when the media published a leaked transcript of the then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's victorious first telephone call with Donald Trump. It was the 28th of January 2017. So here's the PM. I've got the quote up on the screen. It's very interesting to know how you prioritise the minorities in your executive order. This is exactly what we've done with the programme to bring in 12,000 Syrian refugees, 90% of which will be Christians. And grammatically, I think you should have said assume will be Christians. The rest of the quote, which isn't there, is also important. I'll circle back to it later in the talk. It will be quite deliberate, and the position I've taken, I've been very open about it, is that it's a tragic fact of life that when the situation in the Middle East settles down, the people that are going to be most unlikely to have a continuing home are those Christian minorities. But what initially strikes, I think, the reader of the transcript, and certainly me, is the hubris of the Australian Prime Minister taking credit for the American policy. When I was speaking with Jared Kushner just the other day, said Turnbull, we reflected on how much our policies have helped inform your approach. We are, he said, very much of the same mind. So the immediate lesson from the conversation, I think, is relatively clear. At these highest levels, states around the globe are looking at each other's policies for rhetorical, political, and legal approaches to the irregular movement of people about their efficacy and their public and electoral popularity, their political feasibility, not, it seems, their legality or even their pragmatic viability. That comes up in, if you take a look at Daniel Desilbert's very interesting work in this area. Legality doesn't seem to be a concern when we're looking at these the international sort of cross-fertilization of policies in this area. They're considering whether and how such policies can be adopted in their own backyards and maritime zones. Indeed, Donald Trump seems particularly interested in the Prime Minister's response to his concern, really his outrage, that President Obama had agreed to resettle people who were, quote, in prison in Nauru and Papua New Guinea. I won't do my Trump impersonation. I guarantee you they are bad. That's why they're in prison right now, said the President. Lynn Turnbull, who was palpably increasingly desperate to save this deal which alleviates at a certain level the political pressure cooker of Australia's offshore processing regime, Lynn Turnbull explained that they weren't necessarily bad, it's just that we lock up everyone who arrives by boat, regardless of what they've done, in order, as he said, to, quote, deprive people smugglers of their product. Trump suddenly seemed animated and interested. That's a good idea, he said. We could do that too. Adding in a telling afterthought, you're worse than I am. Commentators have passed the leaked transcript for everything from its comic value and the President's geopolitical naivety and mercurial temperament. He slammed the phone down, he called Turnbull Trumbull or something along those lines. They've critiqued it for what it says about Australia's border industrial complex and the Prime Minister's duplicity in the representation of refugees on Nauru and PNG. Suddenly they're good guys, they're no longer the murderers, rapists and pedophiles that Chris Pine told us about a couple of months ago when discussing the Medevac legislation. What seems to have escaped the attention of commentators, however, is the content of the Australian policy that's purportedly being copied by American policymakers. Now, as it turns out, the Australian boast that we were the first to have a Christians first policy and that this was the inspiration for the Americans is a tall claim. If anything, it reverses the actual policy flow. A close look at the genesis of the US Muslim ban and its original exemption for minority religions facing religious persecution reveals not the hand of Australian entrepreneurs, norm entrepreneurs, but the largely white Christian nationalist arm of the American evangelical movement, whose support the Trump campaign has so meticulously and successfully courted. Indeed, as you look at several surveys that were run at the time, this group overwhelmingly voted for Trump and overwhelmingly supported the ban, even as most evangelical leaders and non-white evangelical communities opposed it. If anything, the Australian policy of prioritising Syrian and Iraqi Christian refugees for resettlement can be traced to this same movement's politicised mission, which is to save martyrs, and I'll come back to martyrs, in the persecuted church from the existential threat posed by Islam, and through their redemptive stories, revive a religion that's been weakened by a century of secularism in the West in time for the end of days. A political theology that marries nicely with the worldviews of Steve Bannon and Vice President Mike Pence, if not necessarily with the President himself, who is, I think, more opportunistic in this area. Now, some European states have pursued similarly discriminatory policies. I don't know if I have a slide on that. Poland, Slovakia, the Czech Republic have all said they only accept Christian refugees under the EU's relocation program that was introduced under the European Agenda for Migration following the 2015 so-called refugee crisis in Europe. And private church-based resettlement organisations have boasted that they will provide Christians for Europe's very nascent resettlement programs. The political rationale for preferencing Christians in Europe has focused more on demographic and security threats and the maintenance of Europe's Christian character, but it's not hard to discern theological commonalities. In the US context, attention has understandably focused in the literature on the anti-Islamic elements of the executive order. not least because this also formed the crux of the legal challenges under the Establishment Clause that came before the court. In this context, the provision that prioritises, the provision that prioritises religious minorities in the original executive order was a liability for the administration in the litigation, because it was cited repeatedly as evidence of very specific anti-Muslim animus. So it was also cited alongside all of those speeches that we heard when Trump was campaigning about introducing a Muslim ban and a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Now, you can't take back those terms, but you could excise this particular provision, and that's what was done in subsequent versions of the executive order, and it was replaced with an undue hardship provision, which may do the same thing depending on how that discretion is exercised. So as a result, the provenance of the provision and the extent to which prioritizing Christians rather than banning Muslims also fulfilled a campaign pledge has largely been, I think, ignored or escaped scholarly analysis. So that's part of my motivation. So what exactly was the Australian scheme? Well, in the dying days of the Abbott administration, the government announced a one-time additional 12,000 places in the resettlement program for Syrian and Iraqi refugees. And in announcing the allocation, a joint media release was put out by two federal ministers and the Prime Minister, noting that, quote, "Our focus will be on those most in need, the women, children and families of persecuted minorities who have sought refuge from the conflict in Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey." When this was codified in policy, however, the more blatantly discriminatory components were sanitized through the UNHCR prism of vulnerability. And they created this new category of those with, quote, "the least prospect of ever returning safely to their homes." And those who had followed the political debate in the year leading up to the announcement would have had little difficulty reading between the lines. Despite the many diplomatic prevarications, otherwise there was little doubt that persecuted minorities meant Christians. The wording of the policy is interesting. It will be familiar to anyone who's followed resettlement policies over the years, because it relies on the broad principle of vulnerability, which is a term that counted them. It now appears 105 times in the UNHCR's resettlement handbook and is nowhere defined. This involves the prioritising of those with the least prospect of returning safely, and it's, I think, patently designed to fit into UNHCR's category of those who lack a foreseeable alternative durable solution. Now, although UNHCR were privately underwhelmed by the policy, they remained largely mute on its potential discriminatory impact, and they perhaps were persuaded by the statements that were coming out of Canberra at the time was Peter Vardos, who was the lead on the Syrian Refugee Resettlement Task Force. He assured us all it's a non-discriminatory program across the board, and I'm confident that by the end of this process, when you look at the makeup of the 12,000 people, they will come from a range of ethnicities and religions. Now, in the event, the numbers would prove Mr. Vardas's confidence in his own department's decision-making processes to be unfounded. This came from an FOI request that Isaiah Patrick put in and reported on the New York Times. 78% of the approximately 18,563 refugees who were granted visas in this 6-month period identified themselves as Christians, so that's almost 4 out of 5. It's more difficult to find more recent stats, and I've tried to unpack them a little bit from things like annual reports and statements made to the UN. It does look like the percentage of Muslim refugees resettled in Australia has dropped from 40.5% to 19%, so that's a halving in the total humanitarian program, and that's despite 3/4 coming from Muslim majority countries of Iraq, Syria and Afghanistan. Moreover, if you take a look at the 2018 annual report of the Department, I don't know if that was Home Affairs back then, I guess it wasn't just quite yet. It indicates a policy of focusing on, quote, persecuted minorities with the least prospect of safe return. So the policy remains on foot. It wasn't just for the one-time 12,000 thing.
Sorry, this 78 figure, is that US or?
This is all Australia. This is just the Australian program. Yeah. So in many ways, much more successful than the American program. The way we did it. Very quietly, if you take a look at Australian reports, they not once mention Christians. They do mention Yazidis, which is interesting. It's okay. So they recognise that there's another political liability to going too public on this in the Australian sphere, but it's been introduced nonetheless very successfully. And alongside that, accompanying this shift, you see them, at least according to UNHCR, moving away from UNHCR referrals. So the numbers have shrunk dramatically in the past 3 years from 10,000 in 2012-2013 to 5,000 in 2017-2018. So, moreover, the government also moved ahead with the implementation of what they're calling a community sponsorship initiative. So it's sort of a private sponsorship approach that the Canadians have been spurring for many decades now. Very successful in Canada. It leads to additional resettlement numbers. It's meant to lead to sort of more cohesive, integrated, connected communities. And then there's the Australian model. So instead what we have is a community sponsorship program that's largely a privatization and outsourcing and financial leveraging, making a lot of money of what should really be the government's resettlement program. There's no additional places, there's no additionality of the environmental law, like to say, in the climate area. And there's uncertain and precarious funding initiatives. And UNHCR is steadily being cut out of the picture. Now, there's been no reports, official reports at least. We know there's an internal one that they won't release on the functioning of the community sponsorship program. But the anecdotal evidence is compelling and sadly predictable. It's not just that you might as well not apply if you're a Muslim man from the Middle East or Afghanistan, but as one approved proposing organisation said at a recent roundtable, sponsors are particularly picky with who they want to support, especially if they come from faith-based groups. So, in other words, there's quite a danger that resettlement programs in several countries are increasingly being used as a discriminatory cherry-picking exercise. In some respects, this is nothing new. The history of resettlement is arguably played out against the tendency of states to use it for ideological purposes and manipulation, but what is new is the coinciding of really what's a renaissance in resettlement as one of the new safe legal pathways we should be adopting in refugee policy, coinciding with its discovery by a newly politicized, increasingly influential evangelical community.
Do you have corresponding numbers to this one? This 78% represents the number of refugees from Syria and Iraq that were granted entry that identified as Christians. Do you have the number on the percentage of the overall pool that was applied?
No, so the closest we have is the closest we have are from the report that I think I've got is the halving of the number of Muslim refugees from 40% to 20%, where there hasn't been necessarily a change in where they're taking refugees from. So as I said, the government is remaining very quiet on its prioritisation. And the anecdotal evidence we're getting from people who are sponsoring refugees saying you don't even try if it's a young Muslim man in particular. Don't even try. So, the questions that I have posed to myself when exploring these policies circled around these three. First, I wanted better to understand the theological worldview of those pursuing the policy. And in particular, I was interested in the leveraging of, in this context, images and narratives of the martyred Middle Eastern Christians. I'll come to martyrdom shortly, I hope. Secondly, I needed to consider whether there was something about resettlement, which is an area not governed by international law and not particularly well regulated in domestic law either. These are largely unreviewable discussions based on policy parameters. Was there something about resettlement that made it particularly susceptible to being used for such theologically expressed purposes? Finally, I wanted to ask whether the Australian version of the model, which didn't require a Muslim ban per se, like its American counterpart, wasn't really based on demographic priorities like the Europeans argue, whether the Australian approach by relying on UNHCR's categories of vulnerability is actually the more nuanced and dangerous of the three approaches. And specifically, I want to ask whether vulnerability itself, which is an increasingly popular principle in refugee and human rights jurisprudence, and which, like martyrdom, is ultimately about plugging into this idea of, if you go to the Latin root, of the ability to be wounded, to be harmed. Whether vulnerability, when it operates to distribute the scarce resource of a resettlement place, has a tendency to produce perverse results. So it's an ambitious agenda, and I certainly won't get to vulnerability today, but I'm happy to discuss it with people. So the US scheme, it's relatively easy to trace its origins, certainly not to the Australian model. There were a whole range of bills that largely died in Congress that followed a similar approach that the President eventually adopted in the first executive order. There's a listing mechanism of people from Muslim-majority countries and a reference to religious persecution and religious minorities. We had Ted Cruz's Terrorist Refugee Infiltration Prevention Act of 2015, fabulous name, which included a 3-year moratorium on refugees from a list of countries. We've got genocide bills, and we also have, interestingly, a lot of federal, state-based initiatives to try and stop Muslim refugees from resettling in Indiana, for instance, my country state, because they were going to bring Sharia law with them.
Isn't there a counterpart to those conservative states, the sanctuary?
Sanctuary states. Are there sanctuary states as well?
I don't know. I don't know.
Of all states?
Refugee states.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, I mean, this isn't certainly I think this might be considered a dominant narrative, but it's not the only one around. I think by the time of Trump's election, there were 29 states that had policies like this. It's 29 out of 50. It's still a majority. So the language that's used in the measures is often drawn directly from evangelical groups that have been lobbying for decades for government intervention to save people from the persecuted church. The campaign initially focused on communist countries in the East, and it enjoyed support from Jewish and Catholic and Buddhist communities, but in the post-Cold War era, it became, at least until relatively recently, almost the exclusive domain of the evangelical movement, who focused in particular on what they called the 1040 window of opportunity, which describes the area between 10 and 40 degrees north of the equator, covering the Middle East and much of Asia, where high concentrations of the globe's so-called unreached people live. These became the signifier of enslaved nations, many of which were also marked as persecutors of Christians, and most of which had Muslim majorities. Specific lobbying for resettlement of Christian refugees from this window picked up steam during the Syrian civil war, when from August of 2014 the news cycle became saturated with reports and images of the targeting of Yazidi and Christian minority communities. The two groups are often muddled up in media reports, which is interesting. Their brutal persecution by Islamic State made the tragedy suddenly personal in the Christian West. That the communities targeted were somehow prototypically, authentically Christian, described in one article as ancient Christian villages where the inhabitants still spoke Aramaic, the language of Christ. Those words, by the way, were used verbatim by Ted Cruz when pitching his legislation, and by Malcolm Turnbull in talking about our program. This only adds to the metonymic and metaphoric power of the Dutch, as if they take on the same quality as the first martyred Christians. And the image of martyred Christians, especially in Syria, and in particular of crucified Christians, in 2015 further said this dynamic. René Girard puts it this way: dying in the same way as Jesus did for the same reasons as he did, the martyrs multiplied the revelation of the founding violence. And as I've already noted, there's a crucial link here with authenticity. Authenticity is a very important trait in contemporary refugee politics. We're so concerned with the genuine refugee and discerning the genuine from the bogus, the good from the bad. Scholars of martyrdom have pointed out that for the early church, persecution was synonymous with authentic faith and grace. Thus St. Paul, in a passage in 2 Timothy, which is frequently cited in the evangelical literature, promises, quote, "Everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted." Saving the authentic Christian, moreover, resonates with the very roots of evangelicalism that itself was founded in the search for the authentic text and the authentic faith. Although independent media sources didn't depict the persecution of Syrian Christians as a form of self-sacrifice, let alone as noble and necessary, various elements of martyrdom, Christian media outlets spun a different tale, and sometimes explicitly accused the mainstream media of a Muslim-friendly cover-up, which was an accusation also levelled against UNHCR in its selection of people for resettlement, and also against governments. The language speaks into more mainstream Christian circles. In the UK, you had the Archbishop of Canterbury accusing UNHCR and government agencies of institutional bias and, quote, political correctness, which was an accusation anyone saw the Bishop of Truro in the UK has produced a report for the Foreign Office in which he also accuses various agencies of political correctness in failing to protect Christians. In Australia, the Catholic Archbishop of Sydney, Anthony Fisher, called for an increase in the intake of Christian refugees. He said, "It's estimated 100,000 Christians are now martyred every year." You hear the language. 11 killed for their faith every hour. But those being targeted were somehow like us, quote-unquote Christian, and the subject of Muslim hatred was palpable and often explicit. Churches of all denominations spoke of solidarity in suffering with those persecuted overseas. Websites with names like solidaritypersecutedchurch.org and indefenseofchristians.org sprang up in 2016 to join the more established persecuted church sites. We had lobby groups, conferences, dedicated prayers and prayer days and prayer books, pamphlets, maps of the 1040 window, co-option of the symbol that's used by ISIS to identify Christians for targeting, which is the Nun in Arabic. All of these focus on demonstrating solidarity with and an obligation towards one's persecuted Christian brethren abroad. Interesting, I noticed that when Jeremy Hunt, who's the UK Foreign Minister, talked about Christian persecution in recent weeks, he's used this term solidarity. I find it ironic because as a refugee scholar and advocate, solidarity is the new sexy, basically. It's a term that we have been pushing to be adopted in all of the various instruments and documents, and it is being adopted, but it's solidarity with Christians being martyred overseas as opposed to a more universalist approach to the principle. Looking at the time, so these things were to be pressed in Australia, in particular by the Australian Christian lobby. For those of you who are unfamiliar with it, it's a very small group tied closely to the Neo-Pentecostalist movement that cleverly positioned itself as somehow mainstream and punches far above its weight in national politics. This is, of course, purely speculative, but it seems likely that the messages would also have appealed to our then Pentecostalist Minister for Immigration, Scott Morrison, as well as to our then Prime Minister, who saw himself, Tony Abbott, as doing God's work in turning back votes. And he famously launched the Australian Border Force by calling upon God to bless their endeavours. Finally, in the US, the UK, and Australia, saving they're actually a familiar couple from school. Saving the persecuted church has also been justified by a rights-based concern to protect religious freedom. It's a concern, moreover, that some of the community consider to be almost as acute at home as it is abroad. So in the US in particular, prioritising Christian refugees under the rubric of religious freedom marries nicely with a well-identified concern of white evangelical communities about immigration and what Janelle Wong calls their, quote, perceived in-group embattlement in the face of demographic change. Other studies indicate that these were greater motivators amongst traditional, bigger motivators than traditional pro-life factors amongst evangelical voters. Dana Mutt says those who felt that the hierarchy was being upended were more likely to vote for Trump. With whites discriminated against more than blacks, Christians discriminated against more than Muslims, and men discriminated against more than women. So this sense of embattlement was heightened by concerns about Muslim immigration, security at the southern border, and the plight of white Christians generally. I shouldn't say white Christians in that context. So for the politicized evangelical movement, religious freedom is the first and most important of the rights in the rights pantheon. Again, this can be traced in 1990s America, where religious persecution became the dominant ethical frame through which refugee policy and indeed all humanitarian policies have been reshaped. Melanie McAllister points out, persecution, the quote, now so dominates the representation of the global south that even very traditional Christian programs for feeding the hungry or providing jobs have been reframed in those terms. You no longer sponsor hungry children, you sponsor persecuted children. At the heart of all this is the motivating, effective image of the Christian martyr. And that brings me to political theology, which I will skirt over relatively quickly, and I apologise for those of you who are immersed in political theology for what is probably an inexcusable simplification of the principles here into thin and thick versions. The thin version of political theology, I only do this because I realise that some people actually don't even know what I'm talking about when I talk about political theology when I spoke to colleagues at ANU. The thin version basically posits that our political categories, our norms, our institutions, our assumptions, our principles, are all derived originally from theological ones, not particularly contentious. And to an extent, they still bear the hallmarks of their birth. So things get contentious when it comes to opinions about what this extent is or what it should be. To what extent, in other words, are we still operating within a theological discourse? To what extent is the secularization of politics a facade, or is secularization something that we should shed in order to revive an authentic politics, a more authentic, sovereign, transcendent, sovereign decision maker, as Smith would have it. Concepts like humanity and dignity and sovereignty, and I'd argue vulnerability, humanitarianism, compassion, even human rights itself can all partake in this broader debate. I'm personally much more of a spin critical theologian. I think a lot of critical theology bad anthropology, my first degree, and poor history, but I have found it interesting to see theological type structures in politics and law, and in particular in refugee law, not least because it has at its heart a redemptive purpose, where the deserving, meek, the vulnerable, the fallen, are saved by a good and powerful sovereign through recognition of their plight and raised to their full humanity by being bestowed full legal personhood. Now, this recognition and redemption is achieved through the telling of a story of persecution, makes for a very natural synergy with the martyrdom paradigm. My concern also is that these resonances make the discipline susceptible to manipulation or reinterpretation by those for whom protection of the legal obligation is not the ultimate goal. Rather, refugee policy becomes a convenient vehicle for geopolitical priorities which have very specific eschatological end-of-time motivations. And my suspicion is that this has happened in large parts of the resettlement program. Now, I'm looking at the time. I've got a fair bit more here. But instead of going through it, I'll just tell you very briefly what I do. I look at the Australian approach to resettlement and how it's been used as a wedge over the last 20 years against the legal obligations that we have towards those who arrive at our borders by boat and trigger our obligations in international law. I say a wedge because this I think plays into a nice antinomian theme in political theology. The political sovereign decision is the one that's made through discretion with respect to those who are encamped overseas, that we get to choose. We decide who comes and the circumstances in which they come. As John Howard said, the beginning of that quote, of course, is, "We are a generous people." That generosity is exercised through a sovereign discretion, not through adhering to our international legal obligations to those who arrive at our border. And you can see that discourse playing out over 20, even 30 years in the resettlement area. And the paper unpacks that in some detail. I look at the theme of generosity itself, which is a constant background refrain in our political discourse around refugees, and is invariably spoken of at the very moment of its denial. And this gets me a little bit into Derrida, and again, very thin ice when I talk about Derrida because I'm not a Derridian and don't really understand this stuff. But he talks about hospitality and there being sort of a small and large H hospitality. I think you can see something similar happening with generosity. Generosity is a principle of limitation. So we say we are generous people, but it always comes with a generosity but refrain. In Australia, in the United States, in the UK. And then I look at martyrdom itself in some detail as the sort of an overarching theological embodiment idea that I think is effective and it drives a lot of this discourse in the evangelical communities. The martyred Christian goes back, of course, to the very first martyrs in the second century, through to Fox's Book of Martyrs in the 17th century, in the Reformation, it's always been a highly politicized issue to promote martyrdom. There's always been those who are using it for entrepreneurial and institutional purposes. I think I'll close on that.